Recording in progress. All right. Well, welcome everyone to our 2024 midpoint review for RPI Base Camp. Halfway, which maybe some of you are like, oh God, it's halfway, or yay, I'm halfway. Like I think about in a race, sometimes I'll be like, I'm already halfway. And then other times you're like, I'm only halfway. So whatever your mentality is, whatever happened in the first 4 weeks, you're here. We've got 4 more weeks together to really make the most of this and dive into the amazing coaches, and wherever you are, there you are. Okay. So we are going to kick it off. Tim, you are doing slides, or am I doing slide?
I'm doing slides. I'm sorry, I'm a slacker.
Next slide, please. All right.
Right.
So as always, this is interactive. We want you to ask questions. You push the little Q&A button. We won't be monitoring the other chat button. We monitor Q&A. So anytime in the presentation, please put that in there. We'll either take them on the fly if they're relevant or we'll get them all at the end. So if as soon as you think of something, put it down in there in the Q&A and hit submit, and we will get to those during our session. All right, next slide. You already know all of us, our amazing coaches. I will just remind you, this is a really world-class coaching staff. So if you haven't been engaging on the Facebook or asking questions or looking at Coach's Corner, you got 4 more weeks to do it. And this really is quite world-class, this group that you've got lined up here, and in so many ways. So take advantage of it. You know who we are. You know how to find us. And the agenda for tonight is a little bit about your training why, your cycle 1 review, and a preview of cycle 2. So halfway through the midpoint, and I'm going to kick us off with a little story from last weekend about a running race. And yes, you're like, this is a cycling program. Why are you talking about running? Because it was actually really interesting for me. And I'm admitting I broke from the training program for this weekend because this is a local running race in our local Idaho mountains. It's been going 12 years, the same amount of years as Rebecca's Private Idaho. It's actually in a very similar area. It's the same area that we go for Rebecca's Private Idaho, but off on the single track high alpine trail. So I've ridden around this area a ton of times, and I've always wanted to do it and support the local event. And so I signed up for it this year as something different. And, you know, when you talk about your why or why we sign up for races, there's a lot of reasons, but this was really kind of a cool thing for me because running was my first sport in high school and college, but I haven't done a running race in 30 years or more. But I've done a lot of racing. I've done a lot of events. And so I was like, I'm going to go do this. My goal was to complete, not compete. So it's one of the first events in decades I've done where I wanted to just go see the mountain lakes, see the flowers, and beat the cutoffs and not hurt myself. Like literally that was my goal, is to go have a beautiful time in the mountains. And I realized I've been away from doing an event to complete instead of being hardcore competition in many, many years. And it was so refreshing. So I just kind of I thought about all of you while I was out there, and I thought a lot about the reasons why we do races and training programs. And it really kind of made me think about this program. And so I kind of just wanted to share a few things. And well, I'll start first with why events are amazing. I mean, first off, we're all yay Olympics. How about Haley Batten and Chloe Dygert? And I will just say neither of those women had perfect races. One of them flatted, one of them crashed, and he still medaled. Okay, so that's a whole nother story about resilience and getting up when things go wrong. But if you're not feeling excited by the Olympics, then I don't know what's wrong with you. But why events are important. Really, it's a learning, it's a community. And like, I don't know any of these runners, or I didn't think I did, but I met so many people out on the trail. They were like, oh my gosh, Rebecca, I didn't know you ran. And like all my friends were at the aid stations, volunteers that volunteer for my event were there. And it was just really cool. And I felt this sense of community, even in a sport that I wouldn't consider myself part of, which is running. I was just part of a bunch of people who are running around in the mountains. Huge learning experience, one of how much our being a lifelong athlete, things cross over, pacing, mindset, all those things. So you may not be a gravel racer yet, or you may not have done a lot of gravel events, or you may not have done a lot of road events. It all really does cross over a lot of the mentality and a lot of the sort of camaraderie. I went because it was an adventure. I wanted to see the flowers. I wanted to get up to the high alpine lakes and see what it looked like up there. And the accountability. I signed up for this event a couple months ago, right about probably when you started this base camp training program. And I'm going to confess, I didn't do an 8-week training program. And I'm going to get to that in a minute about why that was a really bad idea. But it's also, I wanted to support our local community. I wanted to be outside. Like there's so many reasons why we ride and why we sign up for events. And, we are not Olympians. This race, RPI, doesn't matter how you finish. This running race didn't matter how I finished. Nobody on this group is trying to do this for their job. And so really what matters is not your placing, but the experience that you get from it. And so, I like to think that events, I like to call them, one, I call them, it's not a pain cave, it's a pain tunnel, because on the other side of it, you're going to learn something about yourself. And the second thing I like to say is that events are really life's training ground. And so I put on here, are you training for the race, or is the race training you? And really my winter bike expeditions, this kind of revelation kind of came to me that all along I thought I was training for racing, but it's really the other way around. And the things that you're getting from being basically in life's training ground, resilience, getting a flat tire, getting back up, learning to run downhill without cramping, eating electrolytes like candy because I wasn't trained for this running event. And so don't take it lightly that you've signed up for an event like Private Idaho, or for those of you in the training program that are signing up for other events. That's great. Sign up, because it's accountability. It's a lot easier to sit on the couch and say, oh, well, I thought I was going to do that race, but I didn't do it. I didn't feel like it. There is so much energy when people gather together, and people will say to me all the time with Private Idaho, like, well, I live here. I can just go ride that course anytime I want. And I always say, yeah, but do you? Do you go like ride 100 miles? Like, no, you don't. And do you have aid stations? And are there people there? Is there energy? It's so different. And the running race definitely kind of hit home for me that like events are really cool. And going to complete versus compete is actually a really amazing way to see other parts of the world, or even your own backyard. But the second part is why training is really great and why a training program really works. Um, I think 8 miles was my longest. The ultra run I did, this was my first ultra run, which wasn't really that ultra. It was 30K, so 18 miles. The longest run I did was 8 miles, and I only did one of those. Most of my training were dog runs with the dogs you hear barking that were like 45 minutes or something. So I went in knowing I wasn't trained, and knowing, as we talk about controlling the controllables, like, okay, I know my hydration, I can pace, make sure I don't cramp, make sure I eat. Um, and I finished, I had a really great time, but it would have been even more fun if I wasn't worried about cramping. I wasn't worried if the shoes that I hadn't really put that many miles in were going to hurt my feet. I packed duct tape because I was afraid I might get blisters because I just wasn't used to my equipment. And it would have been really cool to like have that all out of my mind. So I could have just been like, I know this is the hydration pack I like. I know this is how my bike fit works. I know that these shoes are great. All it does, training does, is it removes all of these little niggling questions in your mind. Like, can I do this? Because you have an awareness of your body, you have an awareness of your equipment, you know what you can do. And all of a sudden that opens up, instead of this little worry, wart on your shoulder being like, what if this, what if that, what if that? All of a sudden you can look around and be like, wow, this is cool. This is beautiful. I'm having a great time. Look at all these people. Oh, I'm eating my food. I feel great. So the training aspect really just allows you to have more fun and to take a lot of the worry out of it and have confidence in yourself of like, if I'd known, even if I'd run 12 miles, and, instead of 8, I've been like, yeah, I know I could do 6 more. So there's so much confidence. And I often hear people, and there's also, I was worried about getting injured, quite honestly, because I don't have a lot of time on my feet. Um, and you don't want to be thinking about that. So I know we're 4 weeks in. You might be sitting there going, well, I haven't done this. I haven't done that. I haven't done that. Well, that's over. So you got 4 more weeks to, if I had trained for this run for 4 weeks pretty diligently, I would have been in a really good place. I would have been in a lot better place than if I got to week 6 or week 8 and been like, oh, I should have done that at the halfway point. And so you're in a great spot to train and really make some gains. And it doesn't matter where you are, where you were the first 4 weeks, here you are. And you're going to be more comfortable in your own skin. So I'm going to encourage you to put the time in. You have access to this training that really is, sometimes it seems like a drudgery or, oh, I don't want to do this on this day. But if you can flip the mentality of that, of like, this is gonna this is fun. Like, I'm doing this because I want to be more strong. I want to be more resilient. I want to be a better mom. I want to like feel good on race day. I want to have a good time. And again, the time that you ride, and when I say a good time, I don't mean your finishing time. That doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It's about you feeling good and feeling vibrant and feeling alive. And the last thing I'll say is that many people say, oh, well, I'm not a pro, or I'm not really racing, so I don't need a coach. I'm not that serious. And this running event really hit home for me. I kind of wish I'd trained more, because I didn't care how I finished. I wanted to finish. That was it. Compete, or complete versus compete. But I realized, had I trained, I actually would have had a lot more fun. And I should know that. I'm an athlete. I've been an athlete my whole life. And so no matter what your goal is for RPI, take advantage of these next 4 weeks, because you have the opportunity, and really you're not training to race. The race and the training is actually what's training you to be a better, stronger, more resilient human being. And we all need help with that, which is why you have coaches, which is why we have guidance, which is why there's structure, because the structure works so that you know that you're not wasting your valuable time. The time that you put into this training for the next 4 weeks is scientifically proven by the amazing people you see up on the screen to really have the most bang for your buck. So, I will just confess, I can barely stand up right now because my quads are so sore. Sitting down on the toilet is one of the hardest things I've had to do all day. Too much information, but because my quads are really sore because I didn't really train. But I had a great time. And so I hope you can look at the event in that way. Whatever state you're in, you've got some skills to go in and have a great time. And hey, the downhill on a bike ride is way more fun than the downhill on a run. So we've all got that going for us. We can all enjoy the downhill on Trail Creek, and celebrate that. But I just wanted to share that training story and that racing story, because it really was such a positive experience, and it kind of put me in the mindset of sort of a beginner again, and somebody who is maybe a little undertrained for an event, but it still went great and I had a good time. So hopefully you can take some of those nuggets with you into your next 4 weeks. And with that, don't worry, I won't be running RPI either. I will be riding alongside you, and your quads probably won't be sore because you don't have to run downhill. And with that, I will pass it off for cycle 1 review. And I think that Namrita's up next for that one.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. That was some awesome storytelling and insight. And actually a really nice transition to what I'm going to talk about. So we are going to review the last 4 weeks, which is your cycle 1. And as you can see on the slide, it says, how did you do? And this is really all about the art of self-review. We all want to get better. We all want to be better when RPI or whatever race you're doing comes around in 4 or so weeks. But how do we know that we are improving? So we can only improve what we can measure. And so we're going to do a little bit of reflecting and look at some measures to see, what have we done? Have we been accountable to ourselves? And if not, we're going to talk about how to move forward from here. Because like Rebecca said, we are here. We are 4 weeks in and we are 4 weeks out from the event. And wherever you are it is what it is at this point. So let's, have some accountability. Let's take stock of where we are. We can see objectively because we've been measuring things. And I'm going to show you how to look in Training Peaks and do some self-assessment and reflection. So you've seen this before. This is our training pyramid that we always go back to because it's the foundation. It's the foundation of how we improve. And without these things, you will remain stagnant. You're just not going to get where you want to get. And so what are these core principles? On the bottom, we have consistency. That is doing the work consistently, not skipping workouts. Of course, life happens, but we emphasize turning those workouts green. That's number one. That number two would be the rhythm. Stick to the rhythm of the plan. So we have hard days, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. If you're on the stage race training plan, you might see your days are a little bit different because you are training your body to actually go out and do harder rides back to back. Once we have the consistency and rhythm in place, then we think about progressing the load. And so each week we want to do a little bit more to continue to push ourselves so we can adapt to that load. And then remember that super compensation. Once we are able to rest and allow our bodies to adapt, like this week, then we super compensate and we arrive at the next training cycle a little bit more fit. Let's see, it's not changing. Okay, here we go. So the first thing we want to do is score our consistency. When we look at Training Peaks, we use the color of the workout tiles just to get a good look at, okay, do I see a lot of green or do I see a lot of red or orange and yellow too? So we want to get a look at that count and take ownership of that. So if you turned it green, great. Give yourself a pat on the back, give yourself a round of applause, whatever. Have a beer, have an extra serving of dessert this week, but you did the work. And what we're going for is, 75% green. It doesn't have to be 100%. That's asking a lot. Even 75% is difficult for a lot of us to attain some weeks. And if you weren't able to, if you got sick or someone you knew got sick and you had to pick up their workload or whatever, or you had smoke or weather or something like that, forgive yourself and just move forward from here. And we'll give you some helpful coaching tips on how to do that. The second thing with the second layer of the pyramid, did you progress? We're going to talk about some ways to actually specifically measure your progression. Simple things like, did you ride more hours each week? Did you progress your riding volume? Did your TSS or training stress score progress? Did you get faster? So maybe you're not training with power and you're just going out and riding some local routes that you've done several times. Is your speed going up? That's another way you can measure that. How do you feel? Do you feel like you're getting stronger? Do you feel like you're getting fitter or faster? All of those things matter. So those are all indicators of progression. And then the third thing would be, did you overcome something? Because that's really important, actually. And when we translate training into performance, you need the ability to, like Rebecca used the term resiliency and being resilient. Did you overcome something? I'm sure we all have overcome something in the last 4 weeks. So think back to what was that challenge and how did you navigate that to overcome it? Training prepares us. It prepares us not just for the race that we're training for, but it prepares us for life. And that is really one of my favorite parts about committing to a training program and just getting out there and doing the work, being accountable to yourself and showing up for yourself. Next slide. Sorry, it's a little slow. So I'm going to go back and just get a little more detail on what you can look at in your Training Peaks account to do this self-assessment. So when you're in Training Peaks, look at the last 4 weeks. Do you see green? Then again, that's perfect. If you see mostly green or at least 75% green, you're doing great. And that's really what we're striving for. If you see some other colors like yellow and orange, you'll see if you did more than we asked you to, and you'll see if you did less than we asked. I would credit the positive. So when you did more, if it was yellow or orange, but you did more than prescribed, go ahead and count that, because again, there's going to be some times when you maybe can't get to a workout, or maybe this was something that you overcame and you were like, I really, I had the extra time and I committed, like I did it. I pushed myself harder than I thought I could, or I found more time in my week to dedicate to training. And so definitely count that. And it all is going in to prepare you for that hard event that you're about to do. Doing events like Rebecca just described is not easy. Even if you're going out there to complete, you don't have to be going out there to win or even be competitive, but it is still hard. And so if you can push yourself and get to these workouts, and sometimes if you do a little more, that's totally cool. Just make sure that you are sticking to the intended rhythm and resting when we ask you to rest, because otherwise you're actually not going to get the benefit of doing more work. So where do you rank? Good would be 75% green or better. Better would be 85% green. And best would be 95% green or higher. So what I would do is, after this call, go through your account, look at the total number of workouts, look at the total number of green workouts, count the positive ones that are yellow and orange also, and then just divide them and do the math. Be honest with yourself. If you didn't quite get to 75%, I know a lot of you have been traveling, there's been some illnesses going around, or maybe you just weren't as committed as you thought you might be. Just be honest with yourself there and decide to make a change going forward in the next 4 weeks.
Namrita, just to add something while you're on that slide, I think it's really like one of my things that I love to working with my athletes, to be crystal clear. You either succeed or you learn. Like, one of the things I've already seen in this group and some people putting out there, that we talk in the language of failure too much. So if you don't achieve 75%, or if you're just at that 75%, as endurance athletes, we're very judgmental of ourselves, right? That happens. And we love to use terms like I failed, I didn't do. This isn't failing. Like, to do assessment and to score yourself like that isn't good, bad, win or lose. It really is about the opportunity to understand you succeeded and why, but also to understand if you didn't, what are you learning from it? What's the takeaway? Which I know Namrita is going to talk about, but it's important you reframe or frame things that way in your mindset, not as, oh, I didn't get to 75%, I failed.
Totally, because life happens, and sometimes, maybe some of you have a lot going on and you just haven't been able to dedicate the mental energy to sticking to the training program. But now is your chance to decide, to commit to the next 4 weeks to maximizing the opportunity to train with us and to follow the program to the best of your abilities, because that discipline is what is going to produce confidence on event day. If you don't do it, and if you neglect to do it, then you're going to end up on that starting line wondering if you can finish. You're going to start having doubts. You're going to wonder about your equipment, and wonder about your pace, and wonder about your hydration and your fueling. And all these doubts are going to be circulating in your head, and you can avoid all of that by just committing now, and wherever you are, doing the work, getting out there and doing the training, participating in as many of the discussions, watching our videos and things like that. We are here to help coach you along so that you do feel confident and you do feel prepared when you are on that starting line. So let's go back to self-reflection and measuring our progress. I mentioned duration, TSS, feelings. Do you feel like you've gotten stronger? Feel like you've gotten faster? Here's where you can look at some of these metrics in Training Peaks. So if you scroll over to your right, you'll see your weekly summary each week, and you'll see the total duration and the total training stress score, TSS. Now, if you look at, week 1, 2, 3, 4, you should see a progression there where you it should follow that your training stress score goes up because your duration or your volume went up. Sometimes you see your TSS will go up a little bit when your volume doesn't change that much. And that means that your training's getting a little more intense and demanding. And so that's what's driving your training stress score up. But in any case, look for mostly progressive weeks. Sure, there might be some weeks where, you maxed out at 12 hours or 14 hours and your TSS was fairly similar, but maybe it went up a little bit. That's great. I mean, we are just looking for that consistent progression so that when we take our rest week or our adaptation week, we can absorb all of that training stimulus that you've put into your body and again, super compensate. If you didn't do enough progression or you didn't do enough work, you're not going to have that ideal super compensation response after the rest week. So go ahead again and just scroll through each week by week, and see how did you do with your progression, and take note of that. And finally, did you overcome something? And think back. If you left notes and training peaks, that's always really helpful. I love using that as a training journal because sometimes you might forget and maybe you just blocked it out of your mind because you had a hard day or a hard couple days or a hard week and you just don't want to go back and think about it. But chances are, if you are still here today and you're here listening and you're committed to the next 4 weeks, chances are you did overcome something in the last, in this past cycle 1, and give yourself credit for that. And that also, I think, helps in that building resilience and building confidence, because you can overcome things. And if you've done it before, you can absolutely do it again.
I'll just add there, sorry, that's such a great point. Rebecca kind of said it, you're saying it now. And the reason that should be in your self-assessment, everybody, is when you don't give yourself credit for it, you're not building on it. It's just like training. It's the same idea. If you want to learn how to improve at something, you have to work at it. You have to train it. So find your one thing that you did well, that you overcame an adversity or a challenge, and actually take a moment and celebrate it. Because then you'll be able to build on that and be more resilient and learn to do that instead of remorse, right? That's the opposite of resiliency. We just go, oh, if I only. Resiliency is celebrating. It's learning to, part of what builds resilience is that celebration. That's a positive response in your mindset that will build more positive responses. We focus on the failures all the time, and all that does is really predisposition us to fail. Find your one moment, that thing you overcame, and celebrate it a little bit. After this meeting, go, have a drink of water or a beer or whatever your thing is and say, yay, I did something. And that really is an important step.
I would love to, I'm glad you said that, Tim, because we talk about this, the training program, the physical training program, which it is. And I opened up this thing by saying, we're kind of training for life. It's not necessarily about the green squares on Training Peaks. It is, but there's a whole segment of this training that isn't written down on your green squares, and that's the mindset training. Every Olympic athlete over there has a mindset coach. There's psychologists over there. It's much more out in the open now of like, we're training our bodies and we're training our minds at the same time. And so the things that Tim and Namrita are talking about, they're a little less developed than the physiological science of athletic training, but people are now actually starting to articulate, oh yeah, I'm training my mind and my body at the same time. And you showing up and doing a workout or giving yourself forgiveness or saying, digging a little deeper, saying, I can do it. I'm going to do this second 4 weeks. That's mindfulness training. That is part of the training. And so it's not just smoke that we're blowing at you guys. That is actually part of the training of you getting stronger mentally and physically at the same time.
Yeah, and I'm just going to summarize that. Basically the same point, but first, wherever you are now, if you didn't score as well as you would have hoped, or now you're looking at those scores that you wrote down after you looked at your last 4 weeks and it's like, well, gosh, this is like real, I thought I did okay, but this is not what I signed up for. And I've I'm not too happy with that. Don't stress it. Don't stress it. Don't try to go back and do the last 4 weeks and the next 4 weeks. I cannot stress enough, like, do not panic. Just follow the plan. Don't worry about it. It's done. It's done. Jump into cycle 2, follow the plan, and focus on each day. Focus on nailing the workouts. Focus on just getting that consistency in. And then when you are on the bike, do your best to execute the workout and the plan, and everything will fall into place. Now, I'm going to give a little plug for the most recent podcast that Tim and I recorded, because if you listen to that, it will give you some really good actionable advice that you can put into place to execute each workout in the best way possible. So many times we go out there and we get on the bike and we're like, we haven't really looked at the workout yet. And so then we might not choose the best route or go out the best time of the day or take the right hydration or whatever. Listen to the podcast. It's going to give you some really good advice. And I think that you can actually, wherever you are now, even if you did great for the first 4 weeks, I think you can still improve your execution of the workouts, which will absolutely help. If you do that several times a week over the next 4 weeks, you are going to become much better. Performance, like Rebecca just said, is affected by your mindset, your nutrition, your overall stress, sleep, and your willingness to prepare. So really reflect on that. Are you committed? Does your commitment show in your cycle 1 review when you look at your green blocks, when you look at your progression? Do you see a lot of red? Do you see a lot of, missing hours and missing days? So does that mean you're committed? Or does it mean that stuff came up and you need to figure out how to rebalance your life to get the next 4 weeks of training in? It could be either one. It happens all the time. That's just life. And if you haven't been as committed as you want to be, then let's think about, like, what does it take for you to just, go all in for cycle 2 and do the best you can. If you did have barriers that you encountered in cycle 1, let's think about how you can overcome those in the next few weeks so they're not as much of an issue. Maybe you need to start riding in the morning instead of waiting till after work. Maybe you need to do some indoor workouts if smoke or air quality index is bad in your area. So whatever those are for you, think about ways that you can address them before they become an issue in cycle 2. All right, I think that's it for me.
Yeah, okay. A good overview. And really another final excellent point. You have a couple extra days off here, everybody. Use them to reflect and project forward. Like, how can I improve? How do I get to more? How many problems can I solve before they're a problem? That's an excellent approach. Because the good news is we have one more cycle. So this next 4-week cycle is kind of our final prep cycle. And whether you've been preparing for 24 weeks or 32 weeks or all year long, right? It all comes down to these next 4 weeks are going to be very impactful. We're really going to be doing what we would term a build and taper cycle. And this is interesting because we're going to have I wouldn't call them extremes, but sort of extremes in the process. The build and taper cycle, this final run in, really is about preparation, what you're hearing here. And we're going to go beyond maybe just some of the simple bullets and get a little deeper, because by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. And we want to use this month not only to put in our final training, not only to execute this idea of build and taper, but to also test everything. And I'm going to talk a little bit more as we get to the end of this section. Let's talk about this physiological. Let's talk about the physical demands and what we're working through. To do that, I want to use this simple diagram, and I'm going to tell you one of the greatest secrets of coaching that you're going to hear, and it's going to be overly simple to a degree that it might not resonate with you, because we as human beings have complexity bias. If something doesn't sound really complex, it can't be as good as he just said it is. If you want to really think about great endurance training or coaching, depending on which side of the desk you're sitting on, it doesn't come down to the magic workout or the individual piece. It comes down to that pyramid that Namrita showed you earlier: consistency, rhythm, and progression. But as the athlete, whether you're self-managing or being coached, it is an ongoing performance battle going on within you between fatigue and fitness. See, fatigue is an acute response to exercise. We have a really great example. If somebody's crazy enough to not run for an extremely long time and then go out and like weeks, months, years, and then go out and run a whole bunch of miles, right? There's an acute response that happens. And that acute response is a negative impact, exactly what Rebecca is feeling today, and in a very extreme reality. She's actually no more fit. She's not more fit today. If she was to go out and try to do it again, I'm going to bet she would be significantly slower because she's not more fit. The acute response to exercise stimuli is fatigue. So when we do a workout, the acute response is fatigue. Now, the good news about that is if we keep doing those workouts and we keep accumulating those acute impacts of fatigue, and the fatigue impact lasts, depends on how deep you go, but you could run it, like you want to call it an average, somewhere between 7 and 12 days. We all carry a certain amount of acute fatigue, training athletes do in that range. Now, as you're doing those workouts and paying the price of fatigue, you do eventually start to get more fit. Fitness is the chronic response to exercise stimuli. It just takes a little more time. This is why it's a constant battle between fatigue and fitness. The negative impacts come immediately, ask Rebecca. The positive impacts, depending on you, the average human being will adapt to exercise in about 4 to 8 weeks. As you get more and more fit, that can be 3 to 2 weeks, but you really have to manage that acute and chronic response. So you're always fighting the battle of how tired am I versus how fit am I? And there's the quandary, right? If you want to get more fit, you have to be willing to be more tired. You can't escape that reality. And when you want that fitness to come through in performance, you really want to see that positive impact. You have to become more fresh, the opposite of fatigue, because Rebecca wouldn't be faster today because she's too tired. So when you think about training and performance, you're always managing this relationship, and this is known as the Bannister impulse response model, and you're always managing this relationship between that fatigue and fitness. At times you're building fatigue in the name of trying to build fitness, and at other times you're releasing fatigue so you could take advantage of that fitness and perform. So when you think about the cycle we're about to talk about of build and taper, we're going to do a little more push into the fatigue realm because we want a little more fitness. We have a little more time, a little more runway to get some additional fitness. But you're going to go back into the fatigue hole probably by this weekend. You're going to be feeling that little bit of grind and you're working hard. But about mid-cycle, we're going to start removing fatigue and building freshness and letting fitness, and when I say fitness here, we're talking about the performance of that fitness, being faster, stronger, more prepared. We're going to let fitness come up. So when we break down the cycle, we really are looking at 2.5 weeks. It depends. Remember, not all the plans. You might be 3 in your plans, 3 weeks. We're going to do about 2.5 weeks of building, really starting on Saturday. We kind of are back at it with the test, but still that's a hard day, right? During that time frame, this is the place where you can cement the work you've done and or add icing, to the cake in that sense, or maybe you have to rebake your cake a little bit. That might be what you're doing here. So focus on the same pyramid. Like, you don't have to, like Nemrita said it great. You don't have to do 2 months of training in one. You don't have to double everything and stack everything up and whatever, because you'll just have too much fatigue to realize the fitness of you do that. We got to keep fighting that proper battle. Just get back to the good fundamentals. Focus on consistency, rhythm, and progression. You are going to see in these next 2 weeks a little bit of the introduction of VO2 max work. So in its simplest way, we've been trying to improve your metabolic fitness in the first 4 weeks, 5 weeks really here. We've been improving metabolic fitness and how you make energy. And one of the measurements of that that's simplest to know is FTP, this idea of functional threshold power. That's an excellent rating of your metabolic fitness. But sitting above that is your VO2 max, like how much oxygen you can uptake and intake. And it actually can start to cap your metabolic fitness. So we're going to do a little bit of work here in these next 2.5 works to kind of raise the ceiling of you, right, and your capacity just a little bit. So maybe we get a last little bit of that metabolic fitness growth before we start our taper. That's really the simple objective.
Tim, I would love to say something because if everyone is looking 2.5 weeks to push, and then you got your taper, which is like my favorite thing in the whole wide world, is tapering before a race. Cause you're like, no, 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 coach says not to do anything. And like you've earned it. And so that is another motivating factor for you to really, really put the time in these 2.5 weeks. Like Namrita said, arrange your life, put the commitment in, because it's actually not really 4 weeks that you're committing to. It's 2.5 weeks, and put it in and you'll see big gains, because then you get the beautiful 10-day taper. So hopefully everybody's seeing that, like, oh, 2.5 weeks hard. So these are an important couple 2.5 weeks. So put your mind around that, put your head down and be like, sweet, I'm gonna have a fantastic RPI. Just put my head down for 2.5 weeks and I get to taper. So I just kind of wanted to call that out a little bit.
And it's so true. It really is. And this is the window. Focus, put it in the bank, build the confidence, get that final fitness in and be ready. Because then we taper. And in taper, we're going to see reductions. In the last 10, 12, really in the last 2 to 3 weeks leading into a big event, here's a statement. This is going to resonate with Rebecca because I learned it from the same person. It's yours to lose in that window. Like nothing, if you understood why I took the time to show you acute and chronic impact, is if you go crazy in there and you start stacking workouts and I'm going to get some final fitness in and I'm going to do a 12-hour day or whatever you're going to do, you're only hurting performance at the stage. You don't have enough time to adapt to it in the taper. All the fitness adaptation is in you already. Now we just want to get fresh. Not too fresh. That's problematic too. That will shut down systems we need operating. So we need a fine line blend. So we're going to reduce the volume. It depends again on the plan you're at. So I'm just giving a bell curve view, about 30%. So you're recovering more every day. You're doing a better job of restoration. You're rebuilding muscle glycogen stores. You're not doing as much muscular trauma and damage. So it's repairing better. And we're going to just lift that. We're going to move that fatigue meter from way down here, kind of tired, to up here where we're fresher, and performance will be following because you're resting here in this cycle and we are super compensating, but we're going to put some load back in. Now we want freshness going into RPI. And that what we're dropping in there is this idea of chronic training fatigue. I hate using the word chronic fatigue because it gets associated with other syndromes, but it's a chronic training fatigue. We're only going to reduce intensity, though, about 10%. When you do intense exercise and when you do all exercise, you have systems that respond. You have a cardiovascular system. You have a neuromuscular system. I mean, you could put all these under muscular skeletal. There's a lot of ways to look at the physiology, right? So you have an immune system response, and you do have an endocrine system response. And that's the system in your body that will create hormones and chemicals within your body to deal with exercise stress and repair and stuff like that. If we over taper and we let those systems slow down, we actually are changing our response to exercise stimuli. We're down regulating the systems that are doing that chemical response and some other things. And then suddenly we over rest and we go into the big event and you feel like crap because your body has down regulated. Hormones are slow. That endocrine system takes, unlike your nervous system, if I took this pen and I jabbed myself in the arm, I go ouch right away because it's electrical. Where endocrine is chemical and it takes time to change. If we let it all downregulate, it's not, and there's other factors here, I'm oversimplifying. If we downregulate too much during that time frame, that's when we're overly fresh. That's when we're stagnant because our body doesn't have the mix that we need going on in there to prepare us. So we're not reducing intensity all that much because we're going to sharpen. We're not using intensity to build. We're going to take a little off the top, but we're sharpening here. We're getting faster, fresher and faster. We're just working on the pointy tip of the spear as we get fresh and keep those systems working. So basically what you see at play here is we're building a little fitness, right? That battle that we just talked about. We're going to pack in a little final fitness, but man, then we're going to work on the fatigue. We're going to lighten the fatigue. I should have put freshness there, would have been a better word. We're going to freshen you up so that you're ready for performance.
I love that analogy of like sharpening, like my husband sharpens our knives with like this like thing, you know, knife sharpener. I love that like analogy you're sharpening the blade on that last 10 days. That's really cool.
Yeah, and Harry, I see your question. I'll answer it in the end because it's a good question for everybody. I'm going to give you 1 or 2 more points with it here. Now, let's break up next cycle into these 2 blocks and just give you a little bit of bullets of what you're going to see in some key workouts. Next 2.5 weeks, our focus is intensive aerobic development. So intensive aerobic development is this idea of tempo, right? And tempo it's a challenge because it's a moderate style workout. It doesn't produce all the responses that we want. You know, if we want a more immediate response, we could do high intensity workout, shorter, easier in the length of time. If we want a lower kind of more building response, we could do aerobic workouts in between. But yet tempo gets a bad rap in endurance training today. But I guarantee you, if you're out there doing gravel races and events in the 4-hour range or longer, which, you know, RPI might, depending on what you're signed up for, be, you're spending a lot of time in tempo. So we need to prepare your body for that specific demand. If you don't ride any intensive aerobic or tempo work, and you already had some in your training, so you're kind of familiar with it, before you go to RPI and then your race pace is tempo, you're going to struggle because your body hasn't been introduced to that effort and load. So we're going to be putting in some good tempo work, some good intensive aerobic stuff. You're going to see this ongoing big gear work. We're still working a little bit here on muscular force. The big gear work totally goes away in the taper because we really want the muscle capability to freshen up. So right now we're still putting some grind on the muscle. And you're just going to see the same idea. The first 2 weeks are progressive, whether you're in your training stress score, you're still going to progress in those 2 weeks. So we're still add a little more load, trying to squeeze out some more fitness. When we move into the taper, there is no mystery here to the taper. Similar content. We're on this right specific challenge. We're just going to do it in a way that we start unloading workouts from your current status. And status, let's just call it in its simplest way, like how much work you're doing, a baseline of work based on what you've been really doing. So we're not suddenly going to introduce crazy tapering intervals or something totally new. We're just going to do 30% less volume, it's actually 10 to 20% less intensity. Again, it depends what plan and event you're in. We're going to keep the systems working. There's enough intensity there to keep your body balanced, to keep everything switched on. You hear that term all the time. But yet, we're going to reduce the load enough that your freshness is going to start ticking up every single day. And you're going to be a little fresher. Your training stress balances, if you're following the training peaks explanation, will be a little bit better as far as a higher number. Really, it's that simple. When we look at the key workouts coming up, there's actually 3, and I could have put a circle around this. There's 3 key workouts. And I see a problem with my slide, but that's okay. It's easy to fix. On Tuesday, August 6th, you have a hard VO2 max workout. This is over threshold. We're getting after it. The notes, give you a pretty good target, but you're really going to try to execute this workout as hard as you can and finish the workout. That doesn't mean just go as hard as you can in the first one and blow up. You want to get all these intervals in, but at the highest power you think you can do. This is a max effort. This is a breakthrough kind of workout here on August 6th. Then on both August 10th and August 17th, you have the same workout, only the picture's wrong. So you could look at this picture twice. They're the same workout. One's a little longer. Is race simulation. I explained this in my workout review from last weekend's race simulation. It's one I hope people really saw. A race simulation workout is a high TSS demand workout because one of the other specific demands of Rebecca's Private Idaho, because she's mean, is it's really hard. So you got to be ready to get a big day, a big TSS day. So this is mimicking and creating a big TSS day in a way that mimics the workout. You get a good warm up, you go right up a steep hill. So you're doing a 10-minute sweet spot. You crest that hill, you roll out to the plateau, there's rumor that there's potentially some wind up top type of stuff. So you're doing some force, you're hopefully finding a group and your head down and a little bit of headwind, and there's some tailwind, always good, bad side to that, right? So you're doing some good tempo work. Then as you're pushing home, you're doing some force intervals. Then you get to coast back down Trail Creek if you're doing anything but the tater tot, then a couple of sprints home. Rollers coming home, rollers to the finish line, right? That's how the course plays out, by the way. So in reality, we're simulating that and simulating a higher TSS load so that you're ready for the overarching demand. Why do we do this? One, if you only train for an hour every day, or let's just make up a hypothetical scenario where somebody doesn't run for an extremely long time, and then they go out and run an ultra, your body's just not ready. And you're going to end up with things, you're going to end up with cramping problems, you're going to end up with performance issues, you're going to end up with nutrition issues, you're not going to be able to eat, because I'm going to tell you something very important here in a minute. So these two race sims, it's the same workout. So sorry, the image is wrong, same workout. Then in your taper, you have workout, and we will warn this, you have a little bit of VO2 max race week, but there's only 3, they're shorter, and the notes will be telling you don't kill these. So I'm telling you now, this is a day where you can make your race weekend magic or blow it. And I've seen people go out and see 3 and be like, but I felt so good. If you're tapering well, that's what's going to happen. You're going to feel great. You're going to do 3 and you're going to be like, holy crap, I'm feeling great. These are easy. I'm going to do 3 more. Yeah, don't do that. That's why I put it on the list. We will remind you when the time comes. Now, one of the things in these 2 race sims, right, is you want to be starting your event prep. You've got some great webinars coming up. Rebecca's going to be prepping us for the event. Namrita's going to be prepping us for your event nutrition. So you really have to dig into. If you haven't done the course yet, you're crazy. Do the RPI course. It's amazing. The instructors won awards, like the shelf was full. It was amazing. Watch the course. It'll totally get you set up and ready in a lot of ways. Then Rebecca's going to be prepping you. Namrita's going to be prepping your nutrition. These are your test days. Run your race setup on your bike. Run your race tires. Run your race tire pressure. Run your bags packed or whatever you're carrying, exactly what you expect to carry on race day. Fuel to your carb targets. Eat up, hydrate, whatever you have to do. Like you might need to carry more stuff, than you might be doing at RPI, but make these your race sim test days. Go back to the Ben Franklin point, right? Right? Don't be preparing to fail here. Test, run your system. If you use both these race sim days as good, hard, deep workouts and excellent prep, lay it all out, go in with your plan. That gives you 2 test days before the race, 2 test opportunities of what am I eating? Are my tires right? Go in prepared and set up on those big days. Super important that you do that. All of that put together, that is our cycle 1 and our cycle 2 preview. Nothing new. We're keeping it simple. The real challenge is be super cognitive of this relationship. That's the secret to training. It's not in super secret workouts and fancy complexities and other stuff. You manage this well, you'll do well. If you don't, you won't. It really is there. So I know Tina is up next. What do we have coming up in Review 2? What are some of the key events we have?
Yeah, so just to close this out, we are currently in our midpoint review. That's today. You're here or you're watching this recorded, which is great. So check that off. And then we have 2 really great events coming up. I can't stress enough how beneficial it would be for you to be able to ideally attend these live, just because then you're able to ask your questions, but at minimum watch the recordings. And so on Monday, August 12th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, we're going to have a race prep webinar. Rebecca's going to really take us through that. And if you are doing RPI, there's really no one better to be able to talk you through what the heck is coming up and how to think about the race and approach it and prepare. And this is sort of perfect timing. You'll have enough time to be able to think about and put into action some of the things discussed there. And then 2 days later on Wednesday night, similarly, Namrita is going to walk us through nutrition and fueling for RPI. And so as you think about what does my day look like? How do I fuel the week of the event? How do I fuel through the race? When do I have my breakfast? What the heck do I eat and drink? And again, thinking about testing some of those things out on your race prep rides and on your workouts between now and then, and between that webinar and RPI, you've got the time to do that. So these two webinars are just, the amount of information that is going to come out of them is just going to be massive. And so I can't recommend that you attend highly enough. So keep an eye out for both of those. Mark them on your calendar. We'll post the links in the Facebook group, but you can always just go to the Basecamp website, go to the locker room and click on calendar, and you will see the links to join, and you can sign up for both of those events. You'll get the Zoom link emailed right to you, so you don't miss it. Got it all right there. And the only other thing we have, aside from all of the Coaches Corners pieces and everything in the Facebook group and all that, just to keep an eye out for, is the podcast episodes. And Tim and Namrita both mentioned the one that just happened around executing workouts outside. That is part 1 of a 2-part series. And again, highly recommend you take a listen to those. They're great if you're spinning on the trainer, doing active recovery day or endurance day. Pop them on. I don't know, you're driving to work, cleaning the house, put on the podcast, and the tips in there. Again, as you think about this 2.5 week push coming, the tips in that are really going to help you be able to execute that 2.5 week push as best as you can. And we've got a bunch of episodes that have been recorded previously. You can scroll through if there's something that you missed, but really the past couple that we've put out are definitely worth a listen, and stay tuned for the part 2 coming up here. So that's what we have on tap coming up. And then of course, pop into our Facebook group, and we've got, always posting the workout reviews, the workout previews, chatter in there. So we'd love to chat with y'all if you have questions.
Excellent. Open Q&A now. Anybody who has a question, you could throw it in. I see Harry's one in there. So Harry, I can tackle that. Well, if there's any other questions and people putting them in there, put them in now. So Harry asked the question, and we read the question, everybody, so the recorded, because they can't see everything we can see. Harry asked, Coach Tim, you're touching on one of my areas of confusion about Training Peaks metrics. I've read the explanations about fatigue and form scores, but still don't understand how I should interpret them. Can you explain how or if I should use them? I actually happen to think they're very good scores, and was around when they were created. Someday I'll tell you that story. The Training Peaks changed the names a while ago. That got a little confusing with this idea of fatigue and form and fitness, right? But you're talking about form, which is also known as training stress balance. And basically, the higher your form, the more fresh you are. So the more race ready you are. Like in its simplest format, you have to start thinking that. But there's a problem. You can be too fresh. It's kind of like one of those gauges where green's in the middle, and then you have yellow, red out here, and yellow, red out here. You have to find the form score, the training stress balance score that works for you. Like I know a fair amount of athletes, the one over there, Rebecca's like this too, without a little bit of training load in there, without maybe in the yellow towards the form load, she won't perform at her best in shorter events. In super long events, you want to go in really fresh because that trumps everything. But the reality is, and everybody has a pattern. Some athletes do better when they're a little more fresh. So look at your form score, Harry, and I have a long nerdcast on this that I didn't post, but I'll post it and I'll tag you. So if you're the one who wants to watch it or listen to it, go for it. You have to go back and look at some of your best days, your best performances, and see what your training stress balance or your form score was that day, and look to see if there's a pattern. That's the real trick, finding when you perform best. So I hope that helps enough. I'll post the webinar in the morning. It's one from our winter base camp program, but it'll really help explain those 3 metrics. We did a good job of answering questions, everybody.
All right, well, there's no more Q&A in there, Tim? Oh,
Nope.
Harry said, thanks. Okay. Well, I'm gonna say thanks to our coaches, and I'm just gonna sort of remind you that Tim put up the 4 really critical workouts. 4 workouts, 2.5 weeks to really put your focus into those. The race sim, especially, I was actually thinking about this in my being unprepared in my running race that I went and did. And I was thinking about our race sim workouts and how awesome they are. Cause they go by quickly because you're like ebbing and flowing and doing stuff, but you really don't do that in a normal ride. Unless you're programmed to do it. And there's so much benefit in these 4 workouts that are going to happen. So you got 4 workouts, 4 weeks, 2.5 of hard work. And then we have the party, to get to top it all off. And like I said at the beginning, the reason we do events, I mean, there's a lot of this training stuff. There's definitely science behind the nerdiness. We love nerds, there's no shade being thrown on that. But ultimately we want to gather and have fun on bikes and ride in a beautiful place and get together and have a good time and not be worried about our fitness or how we feel on the bike or our back being sore or anything like that. And so putting these 4 workouts is what you've got, 2.5 weeks of effort, and then 4 weeks of consistency. All the other workouts still matter, even though they're there because they're building. But really your focus is down, to really 4 basic things in just over 2.5, 3 weeks. So, and then all the fun happens, the fun taper. So remember your why you're here, why you signed up, was to push yourself, but pushing yourself is fun. And so reframing the mindset of, it's not drudgery of training. Actually, we get to do this and we get to improve ourselves and we get to basically train for life, with a bunch of experts here up in the field telling us how to do it most efficiently. So your plan is the most efficient way to deliver you to a bunch of fun, coming up here in 1 month. And yeah, I just kind of want to thank the coaches for putting this beautiful program together because it's pretty amazing.
Oh, thanks. It's such a great community. Thanks for everybody for being part of it. Please feel free these next 2 ask questions in the Facebook group. If you're not sure or whatever, and we can help you, put the questions in there, submit them. You can email them to us if you have to, whatever, but ask away, get these next 2.5 to 3 weeks right. And then it's all downhill from there.
Awesome. We're here for you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.